Click. That is the loudest sound in the world. Louder than a J-dam slamming into the ridgeline. Louder than the roar of a Chinook rotor wash. Louder than your own heartbeat hammering against your ribs like a prisoner trying to riot his way out of a cell. Click. It's the sound of a firing pin hitting dead air. It's the sound of the universe telling you that your time is up, that the ride is over, that you are about to become a flag-draped box in the belly of a cargo plane. Usually, a jammed weapon in a close-quarters ambush means you're dead. It's simple math. You stop shooting, they don't. You die. But this was different. This wasn't just a stoppage. This was a glitch in the matrix, a divine intervention wrapped in dirty gun oil and carbon buildup. My machine gun jammed, and I swear on my mother's grave, that dead trigger is the only reason I'm still breathing to tell you this story. Let me take you back, put you in the boots. Korengal Valley, the Valley of Death. If you know, you know. If you don't, imagine a place where the mountains try to eat you, and the people have been fighting since Alexander the Great realized he made a wrong turn. The terrain is vertical, the air is thin, and the shadows have teeth. We were at a jagged little scar on the mountainside called Ope Vulture. Calling it an observation post is generous. It was a glorified pile of HESCO barriers and sandbags clinging to a cliff face like a barnacle. 6 of us.
Me, Smitty, Doc, Rodriguez, and 2 ANA, Afghan National Army soldiers, who spent half their time smoking hash and the other half praying we didn't get overrun. I was on the SAW, the squad automatic weapon, the M249. When she works, she's a beast, a belt-fed hate machine that spits 5.56 rounds fast enough to cut a tree in half. When she doesn't work, she's a 20-pound paperweight. It was roughly 0200 hours. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, making the valley floor a soup of ink-black darkness. We were running mostly on Red Bull, nicotine, and that specific type of paranoia that develops when you haven't slept more than 3 hours in a week. The silence in the Korengal is heavy. It presses on your eardrums. You can hear the wind hissing through the scrub brush, the shifting of shale, the breathing of the man next to you. Smitty was on the radio watch. I was scanning my sector, staring through NVG's, night vision goggles. Everything was a green phosphor blur. The world looks sick through NVG's, like you're viewing reality through the bottom of a dirty Mountain Dew bottle. "You feel that?" Rodriguez whispered. He was sitting on an ammo crate, cleaning his rifle for the 10th time that night. "Feel what?" I muttered, eyes not leaving the ridgeline. "The air. It feels electric, like right before a thunderstorm, but there ain't no clouds like that." "Stow it, Rod," Russ said. "You're spooking the terp." Our interpreter, a skinny kid we called Mike, was huddled in the corner of the bunker. He wasn't sleeping. He was rocking back and forth, clutching his beads. He'd been acting weird all day, kept pointing at the North Ridge, saying the old ones were hungry. We blew it off. Local superstition. The kind of stuff you laugh about until you're alone in the dark. Then the radio crackled. Just static, white noise. But inside the static, I heard something. Not a voice, a wet, tearing sound. Then it cut out. "Command, this is Vulture 1-6. Say again, over," Smitty whispered into the handset. Nothing but dead air. "Comm check is negative," Smitty said, his voice tightening. "We got nothing from the company CP." That's when the first RPG hit. It didn't whistle. At close range, you don't hear the launch. You just see the flash and feel the impact. It slammed into the lower HESCO wall, shaking the entire bunker like a toy boat in a bathtub. Dust showered down on us. My ears popped, a high-pitched ring instantly replacing the silence. "Contact front," I screamed, racking the bolt on the saw. The night exploded, and I mean exploded. The ridge above us lit up with muzzle flashes like 1,000 paparazzi cameras going off at once. The crack thump of AK-47 rounds snapping overhead turned into a solid roar. Green tracers from our side and red tracers from theirs started weaving a lethal tapestry in the air. I laid on the trigger.
The saw roared, the stock kicking into my shoulder. I walked the tracers into the muzzle flashes on the ridge, watching the dust kick up. Brass casings spewed out of the ejection port, a hot metallic fountain jingling onto the concrete floor. "They're inside the wire," Doc yelled. We were taking fire from 3 sides. It was a coordinated assault. They'd crawled up the dead ground, right under our noses, while we were staring at the distant ridges. They were close. I could hear their shouts. "Allahu Akbar!" screaming over the gunfire.
I shifted fire, swinging the heavy barrel left. I saw silhouettes moving through the breach in our concertina wire. I cut them down, short, controlled bursts. Die, die, die. It's mechanical. You don't think about them as people. They are heat signatures. They are threats. "Reloading!" I screamed, ripping the empty plastic drum off the weapon. My hands were shaking, slippery with sweat and dust. I grabbed a fresh 200-round pork chop from my vest, slammed it onto the feed tray, and racked the bolt. "Smitty's down!" Doc screamed. I risked a glance. Smitty was slumped over the radio, blood pooling black in the moonlight on his chest. Doc was already on him, ripping open an IFAK, his hands moving fast, covered in gore. "Keep shooting, Viper!" Rodriguez yelled, firing his M4 until the barrel smoked. We were losing. I could feel it in my gut. The volume of fire coming at us was overwhelming. The HESCO barriers were disintegrating under sustained RPK fire. Dust and debris filled the air, choking us. We were effectively blind, deaf, and dying. Then, the worst possible thing happened. The ANA soldiers, our allies, broke. Panic is contagious. One of them threw down his weapon and tried to run out the back entrance of the OP. He didn't make it 3 steps before a burst of machine gun fire cut him in half. The other one curled into a ball, screaming. It was just me, Rodriguez, and a dying Smitty. "They're rushing the bunker," Rodriguez shouted.
Frag out. He tossed a grenade over the wall. The explosion bought us 3 seconds of breathing room. But then I saw them. A wave of fighters, maybe 20 of them, swarming over the wall like ants. They were 10 meters away, 5 meters. I leveled the saw at the fatal funnel, the doorway to our bunker. This was it, the Alamo. I squeezed the trigger, ready to unleash a wall of lead that would shred anything in that doorway. Click. My heart stopped. The gun didn't fire. I stared at the weapon in horror. A jam, a failure to feed, a stovepipe. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't have time to diagnose it. I racked the charging handle violently. Clack, clack. I squeezed again. Click. Nothing. The weapon was dead. A brick. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. I looked up. The first Taliban fighter was in the doorway. He was huge, beard matted with dust, an AK-47 raised to his shoulder. He had me dead to rights. I was staring down the black bore of his rifle. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. I flinched, waiting for the impact, waiting for the lights to go out. But the shot never came. Instead, the fighter's eyes went wide, not with triumph, with terror. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking over me, over my shoulder, into the dark corner of the bunker where the shadows were deepest. And then the screaming started. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a sound stripped of all humanity, a primal, wet gurgle of absolute horror. The fighter in the doorway was yanked backward, not falling back like he'd been shot, yanked like a rag doll attached to a bungee cord. He flew backward into the darkness of the night with such force that his boots left the ground. Then the shooting stopped. It didn't taper off. It ceased, instantly. 1 second, the air was filled with the deafening roar of combat. The next, silence. But not a peaceful silence. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket, the kind of silence that hurts your ears. Rodriguez and I looked at each other. He was holding his rifle, but he wasn't firing. He was trembling. What the hell just happened?" he whispered. "Quiet," I hissed. I dropped the useless saw and drew my M9 pistol. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. Outside the bunker, in the perimeter we had just lost, there were sounds. Wet sounds. The snapping of bone, the tearing of fabric and flesh, and low, chittering noises, like insects but magnified 1,000 times. Click, click, hiss. It sounded like something was eating. I crawled to the edge of the sandbags and peered over. I still had my NVGs on. What I saw, my brain tried to reject it. It tried to tell me it was a glitch in the night vision equipment, a halo effect, a hallucination from the stress. The Taliban fighters, the ones who had swarmed the wire, were floating. No, not floating. They were being held up. There were shadows moving among them.
But these shadows were darker than the night. They were voids, vanta-black tears in reality. They moved with a jerky, unnatural fluidity, like stop-motion animation gone wrong. I watched, frozen in terror, as one of these shadows enveloped a fighter. The man didn't even scream. He just dissolved. One moment he was a solid human being. The next he was a mist of red heat on my thermal display. And then he was gone. The remaining enemy fighters weren't shooting at us anymore. They were shooting at the shadows. Muzzle flashes lit up the night, revealing glimpses of things. Long, spindly limbs. Too many joints. Fingers, if you could call them that elongated like dripping wax. And eyes. Oh God, the eyes. They didn't reflect light like an animal. They absorbed it. But for a split second, when a tracer round passed through one of the entities, I saw a face. It was ancient, weathered like the stone of the mountains. It looked like the mountain itself had woken up and decided it hated us. Viper, Rodriguez whimpered behind me. My knots, they're acting up. I looked back at him. He was staring at his own hands. I looked down at mine. The green glow of the night vision was flickering. Static lines were running horizontally across my vision. Then, a voice came over the radio. But the radio was shot. The handset was dangling by a wire. The voice came from the speaker box itself, bypassing the power source. It wasn't English. It wasn't Pashto. It was a low, resonant vibration that I felt in my teeth. It sounded like rocks grinding together deep underground. Leave. That was the only word my brain could translate. It wasn't spoken. It was implanted. I looked back outside. The massacre was over. In the span of 30 seconds, 20 armed men had been erased. There were no bodies. Just weapons lying in the dust and pools of heat signature that were rapidly cooling. The shadows were coalescing in the center of the perimeter. They were merging, forming a single, towering shape that blocked out the stars.
It turned its attention toward the bunker, toward us. I realized then why my gun had jammed. If I had fired, if I had created that muzzle flash, I would have drawn its attention first. Or maybe, just maybe, the sheer violence of my weapon would have masked the arrival of this thing until it was too late. The jam forced me to be silent. It forced me to be a witness, not a participant. Don't shoot, I whispered to Rodriguez. Do not shoot. Drop your weapon. What? Drop it. I threw my pistol on the ground. I raised my hands. It felt insane. We were in a combat zone, and I was surrendering to the dark. Rodriguez, seeing the look in my eyes, dropped his rifle. The towering shadow drifted toward us. The temperature plummeted. Frost began to form on the hot barrel of the saw lying at my feet. The air smelled of ozone and ancient stale dust, like the air inside a tomb that hasn't been opened in 1,000 years. It stopped right at the breach of the bunker. I couldn't see a face, but I felt a pressure on my chest, like a heavy boot pressing down on my lungs. It was judging us, weighing our souls. Maybe it saw that we were defenders, not aggressors in that specific moment. Maybe it just wasn't hungry anymore. Or maybe we were just too insignificant to kill. The static in my NVGs intensified until it was a blinding wall of white noise. A high-pitched scream tore through my headset. I ripped the helmet off my head, squeezing my eyes shut, covering my ears.
And then
Silence returned. Real silence. The wind, the shifting shale, the distant bark of a dog in the valley below. I opened my eyes. The shadow was gone. The moon broke through the clouds, bathing the Oki in pale, silvery light. Is it over? Rodriguez asked, his voice cracking. I didn't answer. I grabbed my helmet and put it back on, flipping the NVGs down. I scanned the perimeter. Empty. Not a single body. The Taliban fighters were gone, but their gear remained. AK-47s lay in the dust. Chest rigs. Sandals. One RPG launcher was lying on the ground, still smoking. But the men inside the clothes vanished. I climbed over the sandbags, moving slowly. I walked to where the breach had been. The ground was disturbed, churned up as if by a rototiller. I found a blood trail. But it didn't lead down the mountain. It went up. A wide swath of crimson splashed against the sheer rock face of the cliff above us. It went straight up, vertical, for 50 feet, and then disappeared into a crack in the rock that looked too small for a human to fit through. I stood there, shivering in the cold mountain air, staring at that impossible blood trail. Viber, Doc called out from the bunker. Smitty, he's stabilizing. Bleeding stopped. I don't know how, but the wound, it's clotted, like it's been cauterized. I looked back at the jammed saw. I walked over to it and picked it up. I needed to know. I pulled the charging handle back. It moved smoothly. No grit.
No resistance. The round that had failed to fire ejected and pinged onto the concrete. I picked up the round. It was perfect. The primer had a deep, solid dent in it. It should have fired. By all laws of physics and mechanics, that primer was struck hard enough to ignite the propellant. But it didn't. I stripped the weapon right there. The bolt was clean. The gas regulator was set correctly. There was no obstruction in the barrel. The gun was perfect. The ammo was perfect. It just refused.
We stayed in that bunker until the sun came up. We didn't say a word. When the QRF, Quick Reaction Force, finally arrived with the birds to extract us, they asked where the enemy bodies were. They saw the brass, the expended grenades, the damage to our walls. They knew a massive firefight had happened. They took their dead, I told the lieutenant. Dragged them off. All of them? The LT asked, looking at the sheer amount of dropped enemy weapons. They left the guns but took the bodies. That doesn't make sense. Nothing here makes sense, sir, I said. I never told them about the shadows. I never told them about the blood trail going up the cliff. Rodriguez and I made a pact. Doc was too busy with Smitty to have seen it. The Terp, Mike, he was gone. We found his beads, but he had vanished into the night. I like to think he ran away. I hate to think he was taken by the things he tried to warn us about. I got out of the Corps a year later. I couldn't handle the night anymore. I sleep with the lights on now. My wife hates it, but she doesn't know what it's like to stare into the dark and have the dark stare back. Sometimes I take that unspent round out of my pocket. I kept it, a little souvenir of the impossible. I look at that dented primer, that little piece of brass that failed to do its job. People talk about reliability in combat. They want a weapon that fires every time you pull the trigger. They want certainty. But me? I thank God for the glitch.
I thank God for the malfunction. Because that jam didn't just save my life by keeping me quiet. It saved my soul. It kept me from engaging a force that doesn't play by our rules. There are things in the oldest parts of the world that we aren't meant to fight. We invade their valleys with our technology, our night vision,
our thermal optics. We think we own the night because we can see in green. But we don't own the night. We're just tourists. And the locals, the real locals, they don't like trespassers. So, if you're ever downrange and your weapon clicks when it should bang, don't curse it. Don't panic. Just listen. Because that silence might be the only thing keeping the monsters from noticing you.